Preparation for greater responsibility. We should view difficult experiences as opportunities to learn to be more effective in carrying out God's purposes in the world. Here's Gene to explain.
Now think for a moment of Joseph's vulnerability. What was his area of vulnerability and why? Well, the reason for his vulnerability was favoritism. His father had showed favoritism when he was just a young man, made him that wonderful, beautiful coat of many colors, which was a royal garment. And then God had revealed dreams to him, incredible dreams about the future. So what was his area of vulnerability? It's pride. That would be an area of vulnerability in any young man's life who went through this kind of situation. That's an area of vulnerability in all of our lives anyway. There's a tendency towards pride. But here we see an unusual vulnerability because of his favored position and because of what God has in mind for him in terms of his future role. And so we read in Genesis chapter 41, "Then Joseph said to Pharaoh," Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. He had two dreams. And he said, these two dreams about the cows and the wheat mean the same thing. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. So now, see, Joseph is giving God's perspective because God was the author of those dreams, even this pagan king. The 7 good cows are 7 years. And the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. The dreams mean the same thing. And here he gets specific. The 7 thin, ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 worthless, scorched heads of grain are 7 years of famine. Famine is coming. There are going to be 7 years of plenty, and then 7 years of famine. And here was the right context for Joseph to make a statement. So now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Now at that point we could say, was Joseph using this as an opportunity for himself? Did God reveal to him that he was to be the man? Well, he did have some dreams that pointed in that direction. Remember those dreams that he had and he told his fathers and his brothers? We don't know. But God led him to say, this is what you ought to do. And the result of that is that the proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And of course we know as a result of that, they chose him. Now notice, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh's king of Egypt. Think about this. Think about this. 30 years old. This was probably the most responsible position at that point in the whole world. To be in the position to assist, to be the right-hand person to Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Egypt, of course, was then an incredible culture and society. And here he's going to be in this incredible high position at age 30. Did God know that? Of course he did. Joseph left Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. Think now, from prison to palace, from being persecuted to being the proclaimer and representative of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. See, God was preparing him for this situation. Now, God does have some very, very unique situations and positions for individuals. Very few of us are chosen to be in a position like Joseph or like the Apostle Peter. And there's an interesting principle that comes from the life of Peter that Jesus chose to launch the church. Here was this man who probably was the CEO of Zebedee's fishing business, but he was relatively uneducated, and yet God has a position for Peter that obviously he's not ready to handle until he goes through a series of tests. And so for 3.5 years, Jesus prepared him. But one of the things that happened to Peter was that he, in his energy, and I think in his self-confidence, and in his element of pride, said, "If all forsake you, I will not. If all turn against you, I will not." But he did. And he failed God in a miserable way. He failed the Lord Jesus. When he had an opportunity to take a stand, he swore 3 times and said, "I never met the man." Because of fear. Took over his life. And later, after the resurrection, Jesus met him there on the Sea of Galilee after he'd gone back to fishing. And he said, "Peter, do you love me?" 3 times. He said, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" 3 times he said, "Lord, you know I love you." And God was testing him and bringing him to the point to remind him that he had failed Jesus Christ, denied him 3 times, and at that point he had opportunity to say 3 times, "I love you. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And Lord, you know all things." See, God was preparing him for a unique role and position, and Peter had to come to grips with those things in his life, just as Joseph did, in order to be the leader that God wanted him to be. And so the principle that comes out of the story of Peter is simply, we should not be surprised that the Lord at times tests the extent of our love for him in order to see whether or not we are ready to serve him in unique and special ways. Paul had a way of looking at his own life to see that testing, even painful testing, had a purpose. And Paul went through a lot of pain because of his own failures, but once he became a believer, just because he was a servant of Jesus. And when God called him to be that great missionary of the Gentiles, he told him right up front, he said that this man will endure many persecutions for my name's sake. And we read in 2 Corinthians how the Apostle Paul viewed that suffering coming from this incredibly mature outlook on suffering. He said, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort. He comforts us in all of our afflictions so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any kind of affliction through the comfort we ourselves have received from God." And one of the most encouraging things that can happen to us in the midst of suffering is to be able to see that this is an opportunity to comfort others in the way that God has comforted us in the midst of a trial, in the midst of a situation. And so consequently, we have a wonderful illustration of that in the Apostle Paul. Well, let's move on to the question, and that is, as you reflect on your own experiences, your own life experiences, how has God used various trials to equip you for greater challenges and responsibilities? Well, it's interesting. In my own life, just to extend the story, I graduated from Moody Bible Institute from their 2-year program at that time, went on to study in Billings, Montana, because this professor had encouraged me, opened a door for me to be involved in radio ministry there, and music ministry, and to finish my college. And it was while I was there that I went through a really deep experience. I've shared this with you before, where I became very disillusioned because I got my eyes off of Jesus and onto people who had feet of clay. Now, these people should not have done what they did, because it left me in a serious state of disillusionment because of the inconsistencies in their lives. But I look back on that experience now, and I see that was a very necessary point in my own life, to go through that period of disillusionment. Because I believe that God was preparing me for a larger responsibility. And I'm certainly not equating myself with Joseph or with Peter or anybody else. I'm just simply sharing out of my own life that I look back and I can see what God was doing in my own life. And there were certain things I needed to learn. And one of the areas of vulnerability in my own life was prejudice. because I had been reared in a religious sect. The group I was reared in, they believed in Jesus. They believed that he was the Son of God. They believed in the Trinity. They were very confused about salvation because they believed in salvation by works. And of course, it was at Moody Bible Institute that I really got the assurance of my salvation, that I was saved by grace through faith. But I'd grown up in that community being taught that this was the only place that had the truth. And when you're brought up in a situation where you're taught that this is the only right group of people, you believe that. It becomes a part of the fabric of your own personality. And so I grew up with this internal feeling that I wouldn't say out loud, but it was down deep in my soul, that I'm better than you because I had this experience. I was reared in this religious environment. And God had to allow me to go through an experience to deal with that prejudice, to even see it, to even see the arrogance of that, the pride of that. And it put me on my knees and on my face before God to the point where I was ready to throw everything overboard, to leave ministry totally. But I can see how then God brought people into my life to restore me, to bring healing into my life in order to prepare me. And I did not realize that when I went back to Wheaton and entered the graduate school, I would receive an invitation to Moody to teach and join the faculty at age 23. 23 years old, to teach college students. And I believe that God had to deal with that sin in my own life, that prejudice, that pride that I didn't even know existed, in order to be prepared to enter into that experience at age 23, 24. Now, that happens to be my story. And I look back and I think God gave me a choice when I was going through that experience. I could have walked away. I could have gone back to the farm. I could have just walked away from ministry totally. But because of God's grace and because of decisions and encouragement, I looked at that, not immediately, but later, as an opportunity to grow and mature and to take the next step that God had planned for my life. And I can see that pattern. I can see it clearly. And I'm thankful that God enabled me to go through that and to be prepared for greater responsibility, which I don't believe I would have been prepared for, because I could have absolutely failed utterly if I had not been prepared. And so God does, in a remarkable way, take all of our lives and prepare us. Maybe not in dramatic ways, but in simple ways, in order to be more effective for Him, whatever that leadership role might be, as parent, as pastor, as businessman, whatever that might be. In a marvelous way, God, in His sovereignty, is in control of each one of our lives, giving us choices that can make the difference in terms of whether we're ready to take the next step. And I believe Joseph really illustrates that in an incredible way.